right, so we are talking about the BRBC today. Again, our first quarter trainings are going to be in line with the 100 Days of Greatness. So if you're doing the 100 Days of Greatness, this is right in line because we're talking about working with buyers. So we're factoring in the BRBC. If you aren't doing the 100 Days of Greatness, number one, you should be. Number two, this tracks with the 14 weeks to your first I don't remember what it's called now. The first 14 weeks program that we have for all of our mentees and new agents in our office that you guys have access to. Um, we always talk about working with buyers first. Reason being is that buyers are usually easier to obtain as far as clients. That doesn't mean that has to be your first. Doesn't mean it is. You can work with sellers with a listing first too, but buyers are usually easier. Um, in alignment with that, obviously, we have the BRBC. For our newer agents, they've never known anything different. For us that have been in the business for a long period of time, the BRBC in California is a new way of thinking. Wah, wah, wah. You know, we always were told to do it, but it was never required. Now, because the NAR settlement, the National Association of Realtors settlement, 2 Augusts ago, I want to say now. It's been a little while back. We are required to have that BRBC signed by any buyers due to the way that commission is changed and now functioning, which is really truly the way it should have been the entire time. And if you've been around for a little while on any of my trainings over the last 10 years, I've told you to use the buyer representation agreement. It just protects yourself. So don't get it in your mindset that I have to do this because then our settlement, yes, you do. But the reality is this is a way to do a couple of things. Number one, it's going to protect you moving forward so that you're not working for free. I don't know why any agent ever thought it was a good idea to work for free with no guarantee of payment. Number two, it stipulates that you are going to get paid. So not only does it stipulate that they're connected to you for the sake of that agency relationship, okay, making more loyal buyers. Number two, it stipulates how you're going to get paid because it factors in your commission. And number three, it allows you to be able to negotiate on your buyer's behalf for the seller to cover the buyer's portion of the commission or compensation or fee for service. Okay, whatever you want to call it, that's what it is. But it's going to allow you to negotiate that with the other side. Okay, and don't get me wrong, because this is truly how it is. Okay, we're not getting paid by the listing agent. We are getting paid by our buyers in any buyer transaction. And sometimes we negotiate that on the buyer's behalf for the buyer's portion of the compensation to be paid for by the seller. However, it technically is still coming from our buyer. They're the ones obligated to pay it. So there's the background on the BRBC. Zip Forms is transitioning over. You've got a couple of options. I went to the new one. Then it's kicked me back to the old one. If you want to get back to the new one, up here, Zip Forms transaction toolbar, the little drop down arrow. If you click on that, that's how you can get to the new layout if you like the new layout better, or if you're utilizing it for things such as your CRM or whatnot. It's got a great free CRM, contact relationship manager. I am highly recommending using this CRM. Number one, it intertwines your Zip Forms and your CRM together, so you're only plugging into one place. Number two, I just think it's really user friendly. It's got some great opportunities here as far as deal trackers, the relationship manager, as far as the automations and stuff. You can tie in texting and emails and build those out. It's got a bunch of pre-built out things. So if you aren't paying for a CRM now, or if you are paying for a CRM, you're like, man, I'd like to cut my budget down a little bit, I would recommend checking this one out. I have some other reasons why I'm recommending it. No, I'm not getting paid by them, but just some behind the scenes things that you're welcome to reach out to me and ask about. But but I do like it. I think it's fabulous. So anyways, there you go. You can toggle between there and there. It goes back and forth. All right. Let's see. We're going to go into the training file and pull up the BRBC. Do do. While I'm getting this pulled up, does anybody, I do have the chat box open, so you can throw questions into the chat box. You can unmute yourself. You can raise your little zoomy hand if you don't want to just interrupt me, which you're welcome to. Does anybody have specific questions with relation to BRBC? Oh, I've made Zip Forms mad at me again by clicking too many times. Now we're going to wait patiently. Be helpful if you guys had questions that I could answer. The BRBC comes with a couple of bonus forms. One of those is the agency disclosure. Your poor clients, they're going to sign the agency disclosure at time of BRBC. And they also are going to sign it at time of offer. So just know that they're going to sign that form a couple of different times. That's the first form that you're going to see. I may have to close out of here and reopen it again because I really made it mad at this point. Amanda asked, do the buyer's ability to pay their agent? Yes. And do we have to send our agreement to? Amanda, are you talking about with your offer? Yes. All right. So technically, yes, you should be sending it, but not the whole thing. You'll see here if I ever get it open. We're gonna have to come back to this here in a second. Give me a minute here. I can't even. Oh wait, I think it's going. All right, it's spinning. That gives me hope. All right. So the last page of the BRBC summarizes the compensation that you've negotiated with your buyer. So technically, yes, it is supposed to be going over with the offer as if only if you're asking the seller to cover the buyer's portion of compensation if you're negotiating that as part of the offer. If you're not negotiating that as part of the offer, you absolutely don't have to send it over. There's no reason for the seller to see it. If
I I've never sent that with it because in the offer, if you're asking for compensation, it's directly on the offer.
Yes, but you'll also see that on the offer, it states that you have to have a signed buyer's representation agreement and that the compensation you're asking for has to be the same or less than what's been negotiated on that BRBC. So in the fine print of the offer, it does tell the listing agent and the seller that they can request a copy of the BRBC as proof of that amount. So most agents are not asking for it. I would recommend that if you are a listing agent, that you absolutely ask for it. All right, we're going to close out and reopen. Give me just a second.
Hey Amy, why is it their business to know that? Because it's
Why is it?
negotiated between the buyer and the agent, not the seller.
Yeah, because if you're negotiating that the seller's going to cover a portion of the buyer's obligation under the BRBC for that compensation, then per the National Association of Realtors settlement, it was part of the settlement is number one, buyers are going to sign this buyer representation agreement. And number two, because it used to be back in the day that you could sign a buyer's representation agreement with X percent, okay, which could be more than what was being offered by the listing agent back in the day when we used to get, offers from the listing agent. And then the buyer's representation agreement specified that if the amount that was received from the other party, the third party, was more than what was in the representation agreement, you could stipulate how that was distributed. Most of us chose that it would go to the agent. So if you negotiated X percent, the seller was offering Y percent, which was more than X, then you got the full Y percent. But per the NAR settlement, it said that, hey, whatever's in that buyer's representation agreement is the max that you can get compensated if you're negotiating for it to be covered as part of the transaction by the seller. So that's why it's the seller's business, is that they can verify that, in fact, what you're asking for on that agreement is the same or less than what was negotiated as part of your BRBC. So that's why it's there. You don't have to send them the full BRBC document. Like I said, it summarizes it on the last page. So you can just send over that last page if they ask for proof. Again, most agents aren't asking for proof. If you're a listing agent, I would. And that entails also if there's a modification. So if you do a modification of the buyer representation agreement to increase that amount, right, to match whatever it is that you're negotiating with the seller, then you would send over that modification of terms. You could actually just send over the modification of terms and not the full document. But that's why it is the seller's business as to what is in that BRBC. And again, that you don't have to send all the pages of it, just that last page that summarizes the compensation negotiated.
And where did you say
That
that
makes
was mentioned on the contract?
Yeah. Here, hold on, we'll pull it up. Oh, that's not what we wanted. We want a new workspace.
My second question is kind of like
Yeah.
a twofold, is where it's on the BRBC stating that the buyer does not have the funds to pay their agent.
Uh-huh.
That's where I have a question of like how to approach that if the listing agent's asking for that agreement, because we're asking for compensation from the seller to compensate the buyer broker's payment. It's confusing to me of whether to mark the box, not mark the box, what to give, what not to give.
Yeah, absolutely. And it may have been, I may be wrong here. They may have updated this when they changed the thing, but hold on. So yeah, I would only check that box if in fact my buyer does not have the ability to compensate me. Per our buyer representation agreement. If I'm going to negotiate X% um, with my buyers that this is what I work for, this is the minimum I'm willing to work for. Here are the ways that we can be compensated, right? Then hold on, RPA. Then you don't want to check that box unless they absolutely cannot, because if they cannot compensate you, it's going to change the way at which you look for properties, right? Because again, I'm not willing to work for free. So if I have a buyer that has no additional funds to compensate me for the work that I'm doing, then as they're looking at properties and saying, hey, I'm interested in this one, and I'm calling up the listing agent saying, hey, I've got a buyer. They don't have the means to pay compensation. We're going to negotiate it as part of an offer on any property that we write an offer on. Is your seller willing to pay compensation on behalf of the buyer to a buyer's agent? Right? And if they say, yes, we're willing to, then perfect. That property is going to hit my showing list. If they say no, the seller is unwilling to pay any sort of compensation on behalf of the buyer to the buyer's agent, then that's going to be a conversation I'm then going to turn around and have with the buyer, right? Before we go see that property, I'm going to say, hey, just so you know, this property's not offering compensation. When we had our conversation, we sat down for our buyer consultation. You had stated that you don't have the funds to pay me outside of the seller paying for that, and the seller's unwilling to. So I am not going to be able to show you that property unless you're going to be able to, unless you do in fact have the funds to be able to compensate me. Right? They can go see that property on their own, whatever they want to do. If that's like, but we're working in their best interest and we're not planning to work for free. So if we know we're entering into a property that's not willing to pay any sort of compensation and we've checked that box, that would be the only time I would actually check that box to answer, is if they actually cannot pay any compensation. Because again, it's going to change the way at which we show properties, and that's going to be part of that conversation with my buyers during that buyer consultation. Does that make sense?
It does, but I have just, I don't, I would say maybe I just don't approach it in that way where like I don't ask of those sellers willing to pay, it's a negotiable thing along the way. And so to me, it's kind of been fine. But I guess there's always someone that's not willing, right? To prevent that, we could always reflect it in the price as long as it appraises to compensate the buyer broker if we're
If
asking the seller to pay.
if the seller is, yeah, and if the seller is unwilling to factor any compensation into that transaction, then that's a conversation that you'll want to have with your buyers. Again, this is your business, so you can run your business however you want to. But the way the BRBC is set up is it asks that question on the BRBC is if they don't have any ability to pay compensation to a buyer's agent so that you can make a decision on how you want to run your business. Me personally, if I've got somebody who I know doesn't have funds, when I go to set up those showings, I'm gonna have a conversation with the listing agent of, is the seller willing to negotiate compensation? And if they say no, not willing, I go, even if we like came in higher with price, if we think it'll appraise, then would they negotiate with it? And they're still saying no, then I'm gonna have that conversation with my buyers about this one's unwilling, they're unwilling to negotiate it in. Does that make sense?
It does. I also have a question too, because I'm running across a lot of buyers where I'm modifying and extending the agreements because we're going over those 90 days
Yep.
very frequently, especially in the last year. It's like common. It's just I'm putting a notification in my phone like, hey, get that modified because we're still shopping. They're still pre-approved and ready to go. But somewhere along the lines, maybe mom or dad or somebody decides to want to contribute. Would that be part of the modification to say, hey, they do have the funds, or that's obviously a call on my buyer's behalf of what
Yeah,
they want to compensate, you know, I I guess, well, I guess it depends, but
yeah. I mean, absolutely. The BRBC is, I would very rarely ever check that box for they cannot compensate, meaning if they're going to compensate, unless we've had a conversation about it. That being said, I would also recommend filling out the buyer financial information page, which also talks about where the funds are coming from. If they're like, man, yeah, if we had to, we could, and here's where those funds are coming from, but we'd rather not, then I'm still not going to check that box, but I may still have that conversation with them.
now would
Um,
that hurt you as a buyer's agent representative that if they request the BRBC and the listing agent sees that we didn't check that box asking or saying that the buyer is not able to pay us, and then therefore we are requesting the seller to pay it? Would that
no,
work against us?
I would probably, anytime they ask for a copy of that BRBC, because it looks like they've changed that last page again. It's been a while since I've been in there and actually looked at it. Because like I said, most agents are not asking for a copy of it. I've written a few offers recently and not supplied it as well. Um, but I would redact any of the information outside of just the compensation negotiated. So whether that box is checked or not, I would probably redact that information so that it's not available to be seen.
And that's available on the summary of the last page now?
Well, it was, but I'm looking now and it may not be. So in the question about the residential purchase agreement here, because they're always changing this and they changed it in December again. But under the compensation, seller's payment to compensate buyer's broker. Seller agrees to pay buyer's broker out of transaction proceeds blank percent of the final purchase price and if applicable blank or if checked blank, right? And then if you go to 18A, so we're going to scroll down to 18A. We're in the residential purchase agreement. Broker compensation, seller or buyer or both as applicable agree to pay compensation to broker as specified in a separate written agreement between broker and that seller or buyer. The amount of compensation, if a percentage, will be based on the final purchase price. The buyers advise that a buyer's broker should not receive compensation from any source in excess of the amount in the buyer representation agreement. Compensation is payable upon close of escrow or if escrow does not close as otherwise specified in the agreement. Third-party beneficiary, Seller acknowledges and agrees that buyer's broker is a third-party beneficiary of this agreement and may pursue seller for failure to pay the amount specified in the agreement. Scope of duty. Let's see here. It does not decide what they should pay. It does not guaranteed condition, does not guarantee performance, location. So those go into more so it doesn't specify anymore. Let's look down here at 19B. I'm just looking at broker compensation. Oh, here. Agents are not a party to escrow except for brokers for the sole purpose of compensation pursuant to 18A. If a copy of the separate compensation agreement, including if applicable paragraph 3G3 of this agreement, is deposited with escrow holder. Let's see. That doesn't make sense. Agents are not a party to the escrow except for brokers for the sole purpose of compensation pursuant to paragraph. If a copy of the separate compensation agreement of this agreement is deposited with escrow holder by agent, escrow holder shall accept such agreement and pay out from obligation to pay buyer's broker shall be an offset on any amount that the seller pays buyer's broker. Buyer and seller irrevocably assign broker's compensation as specified in 18A and instruct escrow holder to disperse those funds to brokers at close of escrow pursuant to any other mutually executed cancellation agreement. Compensations instructions can be amended or revoked only with written consent of brokers. Buyer or seller shall release hold harmless escrow holders. Dun, da, da, da. Escrow holder shall provide to buyer a closing statement or other written document disclosing the amount of compensation paid to buyer's broker. Escrow holder shall provide to seller a closing statement or written documentation disclosing the amount of compensation paid to seller's broker, and if applicable pursuant to escrow holder's obligation, let's say not intended to alter. So it looks like here that they've pulled out, because it used to be the last page. So it doesn't look like anymore that you have to supply that. It just has to get supplied to escrow. Can the listing agent request a copy from escrow? I don't know. These are good questions. It used to be very clear, and that's why they had it on the last page. So it's no longer specifying that the seller even has to verify that amount, which used to be part of the residential purchase agreement. But again, they make all these little changes in there, and that's one of the things they've pulled out. So it's not in the residential purchase agreement anymore. And I was looking on the compensation. It used to automatically take whatever you put in to E1 on the BRBC and auto-populate it onto the last page of the BRBC. I'm just looking to see if it throws it anywhere else as I'm scrolling through here. So it used to populate it here on the buyers section. There was a separate confirmation of compensation, which is no longer there. So you do not have to supply it to a listing agent any longer. But you do have to supply it to title. And I suppose as a listing agent, the listing agent could request a copy of it. So you could, if I were going to supply this to title as proof of compensation, which you're supposed to do, I would say, please don't pass this along to the listing agent unless you have my permission to do so.
I think this document caused a lot of confusion with a lot of people, but it's really not confusing. It's pretty simple.
Oh, it is very simple.
Said, it states on the contract, plus you're having that conversation up front when you are reaching out to a listing agent. Hey, is your seller willing to pay XYZ amount of compensation? You're having that upfront conversation. And then when you're submitting a contract, an offer, it specifically states on there when you check the box what you're asking for. So I just feel like this agreement is between you and your buyer.
Yeah, but up until 3 months ago, it was required that you supplied the last page of the BRBC. So they updated it in December, 2 months ago, to change that, because up until the end of December, it was checked that if you went down to the further paragraph for the amount of compensation that you would, in the RPA, it was specified that proof would be provided to the listing agent and the seller.
Which is kind of funny, like I said, just because of all the extra things you're going around when it asks on the contract already. But I do understand when you have an agreement with your buyer, say they agree to pay 3%, but you're having the conversation with the listing agent and they've only agreed to pay 2.5.
Yep.
So that's a situation where you are providing that to title, letting them know like they're paying the additional 5% or
Yep. Half percent.
half percent.
Yeah. And again, just to clarify, what you decide to put on this form as far as compensation is fully negotiable by each and every individual agent. So I'm just clarifying that to make sure that we stay within our legal ramifications since a percentage was mentioned.
Yeah, that was just for example, FYI.
Yes.
The question I have that's been, working with a lot of buyers recently, it's been, I don't want to start off on a bad foot, right? Where it's like, well, I don't want to tell the listing agent, no, I don't want to provide this form, but like technically I don't have to. I've had lenders ask so we know what if their buyers are paying, right?
Yep.
And title as well. So I've, not given this information, but I've had another agent recently say that, well, I always ask because if they do have the funds, then they should be paying their agent. So who's to say, you know what I mean? So if that box is not checked, what is that to say? But then technically, I don't have to give it to that. It's just a dance, it seems like.
Yeah. So technically, right, this falls into that confidential information when it comes to whether that box is checked or not. If you've got an agent saying, well, is the buyer able to pay, right? Then this comes into this fiduciary duty and that it's my duty to look out for the best interests of the buyers. I'm not going to lie to that agent, but I'm just going to say that question falls underneath the confidential information. If my buyers didn't want me to negotiate it as part of the offer, I would not be asking for it.
Right. And then it's just in good faith that we're being upfront and honest.
Yeah, well, I didn't say that no, they couldn't, or yes, they could pay me outside if the seller says no, right? But we want to be careful because if we say yes, they have the ability to compensate me outside of that, now we've ruined their negotiating power to have that negotiated, right? So we're breaking their confidentiality on what they're able to do, and how they're able to perform. That doesn't fall within the scope of what needs to be disclosed. So I would be really careful, like I said, number one, to not lie to the listing agent. And number two, how to answer that question in the best way possible where it doesn't show my hand. Does that make sense? Yeah. There's all this gray area with the change in how compensation is handled versus it just being a number in the MLS, right? That's being offered and how we negotiate that. And I will say, before they took it out of the MLS as something that's being offered by the listing agent as part of the total compensation, many agents were still using the BRBC before that point to negotiate a higher commission for themselves. And this form gives you the power, whether it's in the MLS or not in the MLS, or whether you have those conversations with the listing agent or not, it has the ability to allow you to present your value to potential buyers, what you're going to do for them, how you're going to work for them, and what you're expected to be compensated based on that. We are no longer, I feel like most agents prior to this shift were ruled by, well, I'm only as good as what's being offered in the MLS. So if that's 1.5%, that's what I'll take. If it's 5%, that's what I'll take, right? Like, because it's always negotiable, but there used to be a number in there. And as buyer's agents, not everybody, the majority of agents just accepted that that's what they were going to get compensated rather than taking it up with the buyers from the get-go and saying that most of the time we can negotiate that, or oftentimes this is going to be compensated by the seller, or back then it was the listing agent. But in the case that it's not, this is what I'm willing to work for you for. What is that value? And outlining that value to buyers. It's making it more prevalent for us to be able to have to explain to buyers what we're going to do on their behalf. right? What that value is, just like we always did for sellers, right? We always went into the listing appointment saying, hey, this is what I charge. It is what it is. Yes, it's negotiable. No, I'm not willing to negotiate on it. Or yes, I am willing to negotiate on it, or whatever that looked like for you. We always had that conversation with our sellers, which really should have been a lot scarier because it was a lot bigger number oftentimes with our sellers than what we're talking about with our buyers. And for the most part, we're still negotiating on the buyer's behalf for the seller to pay the compensation on their behalf, right? So it's still not that scary. This just sets you up for success, and it allows you more freedom in what you're willing to work for. And again, you can always change it. I know there's one agent in our office that often aims high on her BRBC. And then what she does oftentimes is if the seller's willing to pay less, she then splits the difference with the buyers. So she reduces it by half of whatever the remaining difference was. In the example that we were given just a little bit ago, it was like a 0.5% difference. So she'll cut it and reduce it by 0.25%. They pay a quarter, seller pays the remaining, and she takes a hit on a quarter of it. And a lot of times the buyers are like, oh, thank you. That's really kind of you. Right? So it depends how you want to do your business. But this form is going to protect you. Any other questions on the form? Any specific items that you guys want me to go over?
I did have a question. It was like, just a Facebook page, so I don't know if it was relevant or real, but it was being presented that the list or the buyer's agent was asking for the seller to compensate their payment, and then on the back end, they were also charging the buyer the same amount. Now, wouldn't that have to be if it's like X amount and then X amount? You can't like double it, right? It would need to be half and half.
Correct. So they could have a large amount here on our BRBC, negotiate half of that with the seller, right, on behalf of the buyer, and then the buyer's coming in with the other half of it. So yeah, absolutely. It all depends on what that number is, but you can't put a number on this form, get that same number from the seller as compensation on the buyer's behalf, and then turn around and charge the buyer this, ultimately duplicating this. If somebody is actually doing that, which oftentimes in those groups, I think they just throw things out there to be inflammatory. But if somebody's actually doing that, they do have the buyer could actually go back to them. Every buyer could go back and ask them for their money back because they were not obligated to that second amount. I mean, it says on here when we go down to our compensation, let's see here. Amount of compensation for B. Let's see here. Broker involves, buyer includes. Hold on, we're just gonna look down here because somewhere it talks about payments received from others for broker compensation. Buyer and broker should discuss whether it be beneficial to include a term in any offer buyer makes obligating the seller to pay broker directly or through escrow for some or all of the compensation that buyer owes broker. If seller does not pay as contractually required, buyer assigns to broker a third-party beneficiary, and he writes, let's see here. I thought this was where it was going to go into the overage. Let's see. Oh, a broker is prohibited from receiving compensation in excess of the amount in this agreement. Buyers advised not to include in a purchase offer a request that seller pay an amount higher than the amount in paragraph 2E1 or as amended prior to buyer making the offer. So the broker is prohibited. So yeah. I would be careful with some of those groups that you might belong to that often throw out these posts regarding compensation. At some point, the National Association of Realtors is going to find out a way to monitor those groups and start cracking down on them. And it is illegal to do so because why can't I come up with the word? where we're coming together to talk about commissions. Anytime we talk about commission amounts outside of our own brokerage, it's illegal. What is that called? There's a word for it. You know, where like all the telephone companies come into one and make an agreement on what they're going to charge everybody. Darn it. Anyways, it's illegal, and being part of those groups and if you comment specifically on those posts, you can get in trouble for it because now you're part of that conversation. So I would recommend that any group you're a part of that starts having conversations regarding commissions, you leave that group. Because again, at some point you can get in trouble for it. You can actually lose your license over it. So just be careful with that. They haven't found a way yet to officially regulate social media, but it is at some point going to get people in trouble. So just be careful with that. I've taken multiple classes on just that situation. I sure wish I could come up with that word. All right. Anyways, RBC. One of these days I will. The BRBC itself isn't scary, right? It's all put into a grid. It's part of the conversation. Please don't just present these to a buyer, tell them to sign. We need to summarize it. We need to go over it with them. We need to make sure they don't have any questions, and we need to answer any concerns that they may have. I recommend being more vague on this form than specific, just so you know. The representation period, as previously mentioned, can't be longer than 3 months. Keep in mind that's not 90 days. That is 3 months, right? And the reason they did that is because like February is a short month. And if you encompass too long, like if we did March, April, May, you've got 2 months with 31 days in there. So technically that's more than 90 days, but this is why they've done 3 months. So it could be beginning on today's date, which is the 17th of February. And then to make it easy, then we would go, February to March, March to April, April to May. It would be May 17th, right? So they did that to make it easy for you. Oops, I did April. Easy so that you don't actually have to count the days. Okay, 3 months versus 90 days. So you can go just 3 months ahead. What you may want to do is like Amanda mentioned earlier, is like she's got calendar notifications for when they expire. You may want to be like, hey, it expires in May. I'm going to go May 1st so that all of my buyer representation agreements all expire on the 1st of the month versus in the middle of the month, so that I know that come the 1st of the month, like the end of the month, I can go through all my buyer's agreements and get them all re-signed. Keep in mind too that even if it's the 17th, we could come in anytime before this date and extend it with that modification of terms. Now keep in mind, if we extend it out, we're no longer extending it from, like if today's May 1st, we're not extending it from May 17th to May June, July, August 17th. I was like, I can't think of what the 8th month is. To August 17th, we would be extending it to August 1st. So it's the date of the modification. It's 3 months from the modification, not 3 months from the original expiration date, unless they're signing it on that expiration date. So just something to keep in mind there. It is oftentimes that this is going to extend out longer than 3 months. If you're in contract on a property, know that this, as long as you're in contract before this expires, the agreement is still valid. Same thing as like our listing agreements. We don't have to necessarily extend it if you're sure that listing is, or that purchase is going to close. If you're not 100%, like we're not rolling into that closing time frame on the transaction, I'd probably go ahead and extend this out. Property types. Anything that you cover, I would check on these boxes. As well as any counties that you cover. Just so that it's, one day I'm going to remember to bring water over with me, just so that we know that, hey, we can have that conversation with our buyers of, they may be looking in initially Solano County, right? And then they decide halfway through looking that, oh, well, I've decided that, I'm going to cross over the border into Yolo, or maybe I want to go over into, Sacramento County or whatever, because the prices are less. This gives us that ability up front to let them know that, hey, I know you said you were looking just in Solano, but just so you know, I also cover Napa, Solano, or Sonoma, Yolo, Sacramento, El Dorado, Placer, Roseville, whatever it is, all those counties, so that they know that, oh, I don't have to find a new agent if I decide I want to go look at a property in Napa, right? If we only specify on here Solano County, then when they decide they want to go look at another property, number one, we're not covered under this agreement anymore if they go purchase a property outside of what's specified here. And number two, they may not even be aware that we can help them in another county. Here too, up the top, it's single family is default. You can also check the box for like multi-family, like 2 to 4 units, 5 or more units, vacant land. You could also specify, right, additional description. You could put resale or new construction in there.
I have a question about
Yeah.
the previous topic.
Yeah.
I had a buyer that was looking in multiple areas of Northern California. They weren't sure where they wanted to relocate or buy their property. So they were doing a search in multiple counties that
Yeah.
were all scattered out. How would you approach that with the buyer representation agreement?
I would only list on the BRBC the counties in which I am willing to do business. So if they're looking all over Northern California, like they may be looking in, who knows, one of the furthest most, like maybe they're looking, I think Shasta County is a county. I get confused when I get to, there's like 36 of them or something. Who can keep them all straight? But let's say they're looking in Shasta County, and I'm like, there's no way I'm driving up there for a $200,000 purchase, which is the average purchase price in Shasta County. And so you might be like, these are the counties that I cover. If you want to look in another county, I would be happy to find you an amazing agent that's going to give you the same quality of service that I'm going to give you in those other areas. So just let me know where you found homes that you'd like to see, and I will connect you up with an agent that's going to do right by you. Right.
So the
I would,
person that I had reach out to me, they were working with somebody else already. So they had
okay.
the buyer representation form already completed with someone else.
Okay.
So
I would
at
get a
that
copy of that
time,
BRBC.
okay, yeah, that's what I was trying to ask for.
Yeah.
Because, and then that's another thing too. People seem so clueless about that form. They're like, I don't know what, they don't even know what they signed or what was checked off. Because I was asking for details about it and then they couldn't even find it. So I just kind of was like, okay, well, I don't think this is a good one to get myself involved with.
Involved in. You're like, if you can't.
Because if the other agent didn't check off specific counties and they just left it blank, then that can be an issue too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, I would specifically state, or maybe even reach out to the agent. There, you're right. So that becomes a very sticky situation, because if nothing's filled out there,
If nothing's filled out with the other agent specified in that form, and I have a form signed specifying a specific county or area, do all the work, they locate the property, we get under contract, they technically had a buyer representation agreement signed with someone else previously, so I might be screwed.
they could well, you would still get paid technically, but they may have to owe that other agent as well. I mean, that's the risk that a buyer runs, having multiple representation agreements out at the same time. Now, would it even be valid is the question, with nothing filled out for location? Because it talks about in B, broker, including any associate licensee working with the broker or behalf through the broker on behalf of buyer, provides services for the types of properties and in the locations specified below. So if nothing's filled out in locations, I would guess that if you ran it by car legal, that buyer representation agreement is invalid because it is not complete. I would not take the risk though. I would want to, if that was a buyer was coming to me and they said, yeah, I signed it, here's a copy of it, but they don't service these counties. And this, I want to look at a property here in Vacaville. I'm probably going to be on the phone with that agent saying, hey, I know you have a BRBC in place with this buyer. You have told them that you don't come as far south as Solano County. They've sought me out to help them find a property here in Solano County. I was going to go show them properties, but I just want clarification from you because it's not filled out on your BRBC for locations. So I just want to confirm with you, and maybe could you send me an email stating that in fact you do not service Solano County and they're not obligated to pay you a fee if they purchase a property in Solano County, because I want my buyers to be happy at the end. And if we get to the end, they pay me and then this other agent comes after them, that's going to ruin the whole experience for them. So I'm probably going to have a conversation or just walk away from it altogether. Advise the buyers that, hey, you should probably go back to your agent that's helping you in those further north. They need to fill out which counties they actually service or which cities or areas, locations, in order for this to be a valid agreement. But I'm not going to get in the middle of that. So until that's completed, I don't want you to be obligated to pay 2 compensation or 2 commissions or 2 fee for services, right? Because that becomes a really gray area. I don't think it would be valid based on contract law. But I'm not the lawyer, and I would want to run it by Carlegal. But that's why it's important to fill this out, right? And this is why I would put any of the counties that I service on here is just part of my template so that it's always there. Because again, if B is saying property acquired, types of properties, and in the location specified, if the locations specified aren't completed, then it's not a valid agreement. Just like if we don't have a representation period in there, it's not a valid agreement. So important.
Now, I have a question because I have the PRSA and the BRBCs as options, especially with like, depending on the buyer, how many times I've met them and things like that.
Yep.
How do you get, or what would be an advised way of making people feel comfortable to sign things? Because I've had a lot of people that have zero knowledge and don't want to put their John Hancock on anything, or people that have had decades of knowledge and say, I've never done this. This is ridiculous. I'm not signing anything with you.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes it really easy for then you to say, well, I would love the opportunity to represent you as a buyer's agent. Unfortunately, this is what is required, not just by myself, but my brokerage, as well as the National Association of Realtors, because I am a licensed realtor. Here's the benefits of being a licensed realtor. I would give them that is your agent is a real estate agent or realtor form, the disclosure that walks them through the benefits of having a realtor, and then let them know that, well, it's required to be signed. I do have this temporary one. This only obligates you that if we decide to make an offer on the properties that we're seeing today or the properties we're seeing tomorrow, right? These handful of properties, because we haven't decided if we're going to be a good fit yet, or even that you want to work with me. But this one, the PSRA, right, sets it up that just for the properties that I'm going to show you, which I have to have this done in order to open doors for you, that you will owe me compensation because this is a property that now I'm involved with you in, right? So I would go that PSRA for anybody who's hesitant to do so, and I would explain it to them. And I would have, like I said, I would have that realtor disclosure with me. Let's see here.
The disclosure's on the PSRA. It's the first page.
Okay. Is it on there now?
The relationship. It's non-exclusive, however, for the PSRA.
Yeah.
But I have come across a buyer that was like, oh, we don't have a signed agreement with anybody, but we've seen houses. I don't know what that meant really, right? So whatever. So I have the PSRA and they just were total cold feet, total turned off. And I'm like, if the other agent's not doing this, why do you trust them to write an offer for you? This is our job to write legal contracts. That scares me that there's a lot of people out there not using these is kind of my, I don't know, teacher's pet.
Yeah,
I'm doing the right thing, and then people are scared that I'm doing the right thing and asking for signatures while other agents are out there not getting signatures and just doing it old school way.
just doing it the old school way. And here's the risk that you run with those people that you're getting ready to go show properties to that are unwilling to sign and that are saying that they're seeing properties with other agents and they haven't signed. I personally would not go open a door for them without at least having the PSRA signed, because chances are they're going to go see that property with you because one of those other agents weren't available, and they're going to turn around and write that offer with somebody else. And that's probably where most of their reluctance lies, is that they really are just using you to open a door.
Yeah, that's a big red flag. When I heard that, I'm like,
Not all business is good business, right?
Not all business is good, right? And this is why for years now people are like, because before it was required to have people sign in to open houses, or encouraged to have people sign in, I always had people sign in, and they said, what do you do if they don't sign in? I tell them they can't see the property. Like, I'm here for lead gen. If they don't want to sign in, they're probably not going to buy the house. They're definitely not going to use me as their agent. They can just not come through the door. They can look at it from the outside. And they can go have their agent come and show it to them at another time, right? It's the same thing with, if I'm reluctant to sign any sort of agreement, even a temporary one that just specifies these properties that we're seeing today, then chances are they're using me and they don't want to admit to it. I wouldn't show properties. I'm not going to go work for free. I would not go take a job for Taco Bell without having an employment agreement signed that I knew I was going to get paid by them. Why would I go work for anybody else for free? Right? Especially one that's not even guaranteed that it's going to result in a closed transaction at the end. This is my greatest hope.
Don't just check them off the box and say next.
Check them off the box and say next. And say, just like, you can probably come up with a really clever line of, just like, I'm unwilling to show you properties, right? Because you're not willing to commit. Yeah, I'm going to have the same level of negotiation with what you want in the property that you're going to make the offer on. I'm going to stand in front of your offer and back it up the same way I'm backing myself up with this PSRA, or buyer's representation agreement.
Amy, so is this the same thing for Zillow Flex leads as well, that you need to have them sign it for okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say probably most are agents. I don't know. This is a guess on those Zillow Flex leads, because sometimes with our Zillow Flex leads, you just need to get them through a door to start building that relationship, which is where that PSRA comes into place. And it's more of a temporary buyer's representation agreement. It's not exclusive. It doesn't lock them in working with you. It only allows you to show them the list of properties that you're going to go show them. But it allows you, because those Zillow leads, oftentimes you're not going to get them in the office first for a buyer consultation. They want to go see a property. So oftentimes we use the PSRA first with them to just get in the door, build that relationship, and then we come back and get that BRBC signed. Amanda, is that kind of...
I have them with a pen and printed paper and say, here you go. I have the key in hand, and I don't open the door until they sign it. So they're understanding about what it is and how I'm working on their behalf. And I feel like if you don't work with agents that have you sign agreements, I'm scared for you. Personally.
If you're going to go show properties without them signing an agreement, you're scared for you.
Yeah. The PRSA, if you have that and they decide to write an offer, you are able to write a contract with that, or would you need it to be a BRBC?
Nope, you can use the PSRA. Yep. If they decide to write an offer on one of the properties listed on the PSRA, you're covered.
Only for the 30 days.
Well, once you write that, yes. So you're covered for the time period specified in that PSRA for the property specified. And if you're in contract, same as this one, if you're in so if you do write an offer, it gets accepted. As long as you're in contract on that property, the expiration date doesn't matter at that point. Yep. Yeah. Okay. So top portion, really important to fill out. Make sure you fill it out all the way. Like I said, it can be more global, right? It can be more vague. You don't have to be specific of, here's the 10 cities that I service. It can be counties, right? I wouldn't put general areas. Like I wouldn't be like Northern California, because now what, are you going to drive all the way up to Eureka to show properties one day? That's probably not in your best interest. But you also want it, right? We can use this as a conversation piece as we're walking through a buyer consultation. So they're aware, because a lot of times buyers specifically, they're like, oh, like I had a buyer up here the other day that I opened the door for. It's my listing, but they were seeing multiple properties with multiple agents because they didn't understand. Nobody told them that they weren't seeing it with the agents that had the property listed, that they had, called a number and then called another number and then called another number. And now they've got 3 different agents opening properties, and nobody said, it doesn't matter who's got the listing, I can represent you. And here's the reason you should be represented by a buyer's agent, right? We need to have those conversations with buyers of why having a buyer's agent is important, why not going directly to the listing agent's important, what I'm going to do for them, right? All that value. And this allows you to kind of walk through that process with them, as well as let them know all the different ways that you can represent them in resale and new construction in Yolo County and Solano County and Napa County, that any property they see that I can help with for sale by owner properties, right? Or if we're not finding anything that's on the market, here's what I'm going to do to try to find a property that matches your criteria that's not on the market. Right? Have those conversations with your buyers as you're filling this out, because now it becomes a lot less scary. And they're like, oh my gosh, this agent's going to do so much for me. Right? So then when we get down to the section where it talks about compensation, them signing, they're going to agree to work with you. They're like, yeah, absolutely. If you do all this, then yeah. And you're saying that for the most part, we can negotiate this with the seller of the property, that maybe they'll cover that. Then they're going to be like, oh, this is even better, right? And I would be careful saying anything about that. The seller always covers it. Even if every offer you've written in the last year, the seller has covered it, we don't ever say always. We say oftentimes, right? We can try to negotiate it with any offer that the seller covers that compensation. Oftentimes, I'm often successful in getting the seller to pay your portion of the compensation to me. Right? And they're gonna be like, oh, this agent here, she's successful at this, versus the one I talked to yesterday didn't say that. Right? It's all in how you share your story and your value. All right, amount of compensation, fill that out. Payments received by broker from seller, right? If the broker receives compensation from seller or others for broker's representation of buyer, the amount shall be credited against the buyer's obligation to pay broker. A broker shall not receive any amount in excess of the amount specified right here in 2E. Continuation period. So this is, hey, once this has ended, the continuation period. What does that matter? Well, that matters that if my thing expires tomorrow, we went and saw 5 properties today, it expires tomorrow. Buyer decided that they're just going to go talk to the seller directly, and they're not going to renew the buyer broker agreement because they knew it expires. If it's broker involved properties, they're still due to pay me compensation for those properties for which there was broker involvement during the terms of this agreement. Now, keep in mind that you do need to provide them, make sure they have a list of all the properties they've seen. So I would have a cart in my MLS, right, in Barry's, and any property I've seen or done work for them on their behalf, because it's more than just seen. If I've called and had conversations with listing agents about properties, if I've done some work, I pulled up the disclosures for them on like a home light file, right? Because they asked for information, not just I had them on an auto drip and I told them the property was for sale, but I actually did work for them. Those are all broker involved properties. And you want to keep a list of those so that when the representation period ends or they cancel it for any reason, if we're not closing on a property, that you have that list of properties to provide to them. Keep that in mind. Cancellation rights there. Buyer deliver personal financial information. Notice this isn't are they? It's not a box you check. Like this form is attached to this. It should be part of it. And that's where they disclose that we have the conversations about the good faith deposit. We have conversations about the amount of down payment, the amount that they're willing to finance, whether they are pre-approved yet, whether they aren't pre-approved yet, where the funds are coming from to pay me compensation, right? It has all of those conversations on there. And again, that can be more of a conversation than a checkbox on a form. So you can work through that as part of your buyer consultation. I like to have it filled out at the same time as the BRBC. Here's that little box that we were talking about earlier. The buyer does not have sufficient funds to pay broker. Broker's obligation to represent buyer in a transaction is contingent upon a seller's agreement to pay the amount of compensation in 2E. Meaning that, hey, if we want to buy a property and the seller's not going to compensate, I no longer have to represent you. Okay. Other terms is H, and that's the end of the grid. It's really short, one-page grid. Everything else is just really going into more detail on each of those line items. I would recommend that you take time to read through this whole form. Okay, make sure you're familiar with it. Make sure you know what's referenced, because that way, as we walk through this grid with our potential buyers, we can explain it to them. Oh, the other thing is up here, A2, 2A2, type of representation. Please check the box for exclusive. Please, please, please. You'll thank me later, I promise. Okay, if we don't check the box, let's go with the positive. When we check the box, that means that any property the buyer purchases during the term of the representation period, we're due compensation on. New construction, for sale by owner, whatever it is. Okay, as long as it falls within the property type and the location that's listed on here. Exclusive means that I don't have to be actually involved. They might have gone behind my back and gone and seen an open house and didn't tell me about it and decided to write an offer on that open house. Okay, now they're closing on it. I'm due compensation. They should have called me. Okay, this also is our obligation to let buyers know that they should call you if they want to go see an open house or they want to go see new construction, that you want to be there with them to protect their interests, right? So explain that to them. If the box is not checked for exclusive and it's not exclusive, it means that if they go and decide to write a offer on a property in the area that you service, right next door to the house that you showed them, if you didn't do any work on that, it's not a broker involved property, you're not going to get paid. Wah, wah, wah. So please check the box for exclusive. Okay, that's why we use the exclusive listing agreement too, so that anybody who buys that house, we get compensated. We check this box on the buyer representation so that any house that they purchase in the areas that we service, we get compensated. Okay. Any other questions on your buyer representation and broker compensation form, your BRBC? I feel like we had a lot of really good conversations around this form today. And I appreciate that. Thank you for showing up and having those questions and asking them and working through them together. I think that was really good, because the more conversations we have around this form, the more comfortable we get with it. And like, how does that work if you've got a buyer in another county that has a signed agreement with somebody else and they want to see one here, right? Does it stipulate that or not? Get a copy of that BRBC. Make sure they have a copy of the signed BRBC. Number one, it's your legal obligation to do so. And number two, that way if they go see other properties and somebody asks them if they have one, they're going to be like, yes, I do. And here's a copy of it. I personally like to create a file for all of my buyers inside of HomeLight Listing Management. You can't do it before there's a property identified is the only difficulty. I'll have to find a workaround for that. I'm sure there's a workaround for that. Where they have access to all their forms, or just have a Google Drive for each buyer. right? Where you can share that Google Drive. So anything that you have goes into that folder. And if you share that folder with them so they have access to it, then they always have access to those items as well. Just something so that they have access to all the documents that they have signed. All right. Fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you. You are welcome. We will see you all next week.
Sounds good. Stay warm.
Stay warm. Yeah, we've got like 6 inches of snow on the ground right now.